It's time for Supply Chain Now Radio, broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Supply Chain Now Radio spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Good morning. Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to the show. We are broadcasting live today, if you can't hear it, from MODEX, the largest supply chain trade show in the Western Hemisphere. It's being held right here in Supply Chain City, Atlanta, GA. And on today's show, we're speaking with one of the business leaders helping to make supply chain happen throughout the Metro Atlanta region, certainly the greater southeastern U.S., and by extension, the entire world. So stay tuned as we look to increase your supply chain IQ. On a quick programming note, you can find our podcast wherever you get your podcast from, including YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. We'd love to have you subscribe so you don't miss a single thing. I want to welcome in my weirdly quiet co-host thus far. He always breaks in early on. But Greg White, serial supply chain tech entrepreneur, trusted advisor, and legendary Atlanta City tennis champion. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm trying to be more disciplined.
Yeah, you
Scott.
still didn't bring in that dadgum gold plate.
No, I'm waiting until we're back in studio. Look,
Okay.
I don't feel like these people should be burdened with that kind of distraction. I don't want people rushing the stage here in this public environment.
Well, there's such an audience.
Yes.
Such an audience.
Yeah.
But so the gold plate is just to make the connection. You won a doubles tournament or a league doubles.
It's city championship, so single elimination 4-round
Easy for you to say.
tournament
Yeah.
after a 7-week season.
I'm establishing my tennis know-how right this second. So his doubles, is that you got 3 other teammates?
It's 5 lines, so four additional teams of doubles. And it was mixed doubles. Thankfully, my partner was able to carry me. She did a great job. And,
Fantastic.
Yeah. Yep.
Well,
and the rest of our team did a great job as well. So.
Okay. I see you're sponsored by an athletic apparel now. After you
yes,
win that
that's right.
championship.
Yes, yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Well,
it's an endorsement. Endorsement deal.
We're kidding. We are kidding. All right. So we got a great
Ignore
guest
this
today.
logo.
That's right. We got a great guest today, and actually we've been fortunate to connect with Daniel Studdard twice this week.
Yeah.
And we'll touch on the other reason here shortly. But Daniel serves as principal transportation planner with the Atlanta Regional Commission. Daniel, good morning.
Good morning, Scott.
Great to have you once again.
Yep.
So earlier this week we hosted the 2020 Atlanta Supply Chain Awards. MODEX technically hosted them. You presented for the second year in a row one of those awards. I know that you and your team, and certainly the ARC, which we're going to learn more about here momentarily, does so much to help make business happen, certainly supply chain happen, and appreciate what you do.
Thank you. Appreciate what y'all do here.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks
All
for
right.
joining us.
So now we're going to get the nitty-gritty on Daniel Studdard.
Here we go.
Before we talk shop, before we kind of get some of the things that you and your team do at ARC, tell us more about yourself. Where you're from, where you grew up, and give us an anecdote or two about your upbringing.
Well, I'm actually a native of the Atlanta area, which is a little bit uncommon. You think you're in Atlanta, you'd find a lot of natives, but of course we have people from all over that moved to Atlanta, it seems.
South Carolina, Kansas.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I was born not too far from here in DeKalb County. Grew up in kind of DeKalb County, Rockdale County mostly. So Conyers, Georgia, for folks who are familiar, and kind of Stone Mountain, Lithonia area where I was born. So grew up, native of the area, so kind of unique like that. Graduated high school and headed out to University of Georgia for undergrad.
In beautiful Athens, GA.
Go Dogs.
Yep.
Love Athens, classic college town. About 30,000 students there at the time, back in the late 90s when I was in school. Wow. It's grown since then. Certainly it's bigger now. Yeah. I was actually up there at the campus a couple weeks ago, and it's every time I go up there, it's different. It's growing, and you're like, there used to be something else there. Now there's a massive building, so it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
My undergraduate was actually journalism, mass communications, and so kind of back in the day, I looked at TV and thought, that looks interesting. I want to do that.
Yes.
And we actually had a program for that when I was in high school, kind of a video production program. So I started doing that back then and kind of freelance different gigs with, the Athletic Association and things like that.
Very cool.
That were available if somebody needed to, shoot a game or make a highlight video or something like that. Then myself and a couple other students would manage to do it and occasionally even make a couple dollars off of it, which was nice.
Very nice.
So you could
little business.
At that age,
splurge off ramen noodles and actually have a real meal every once in a while.
Well, this was high school, so this was extra spending money. It was college more so that had to do it and live off the ramen noodles.
Yeah.
Well, what so what he's saying is he's tracking a mentally checklist of all the things we're doing wrong here with our production. Greg, you know that, right?
Yeah.
Doing great.
We're going to get a consulting a couple hours from Daniel.
He's looking at our camera and going, man, that's a lot smaller than the one
it is. It used to be something big up on the shoulder like this, and now you've got an iPhone.
Yeah.
It is amazing.
Looks like a new iPhone, too. So
oh, yeah. That thing is
quality.
It's
good,
a powerful camera. It really is amazing.
Yeah. It can see right into what you had for breakfast this morning.
That HD on that camera really is better than what I was shooting with, back in the day. So
yeah,
not kidding.
Well, so clearly, so when you graduated from Georgia, what we're talking kind of pre-show of kind of what led into your current role, and we'll touch more on your kind of your professional journey.
Right.
But part of that was graduate school at Georgia Tech. Is that right?
It was. So I worked for about 3 years in between undergrad and grad school. I was kind of behind the scenes in TV news production, corporate video production, and then decided I wanted to become a planner, a transportation planner.
Now,
what inspired that?
Yes.
I always get that question.
Yeah.
So if you've ever been sitting in traffic and you have some opinion like, why is this intersection like this? Why isn't there a turn lane here?
Oh.
Or why isn't there a sidewalk here? Why do I have to cross the street? Like even on campus at UGA, there were locations where I was like, there should be a sidewalk here. Why do I have to go over here? Why do I have to do this? And I always had lots of opinions, as most of us probably do.
Yep.
I'm not saying they were good opinions or smart opinions, but I had plenty of opinions.
You're in the right place.
Yeah. House of Opinions.
Exactly.
That's what we call it.
And so I had plenty of opinions, and this was kind of 2002. The economy was a little slower. The job I was at, had some pros and cons, like many jobs do. And I kind of started looking around about what do I want to do for the rest of my life, and somewhat stumbled upon planning as a profession, and somewhat will give partial credit to my then girlfriend at the time, who got tired of me having those opinions and said, if you think so, so much, go to grad school, get a degree, and happened to actually send me something about the program at Georgia Tech in city planning. She was looking at grad schools too. We both were, and she was like, "Go do this." I'm like, "I think I might." And
yes, and I'm not taking you with me.
Well, we went different grad schools, different careers after that. But it's kind of funny. Like I look back at that, like that was a decision,
pivotal moment.
Maybe, of going to grad school.
Do you send her a basket of gifts on the anniversary?
I don't. Maybe I should at some point.
Because
not if you're married. I'm just going to tell you.
Right, that wouldn't go well.
Not even so much as a thank you on Facebook, by the way.
This is taking a strange turn.
It is.
But all right, so let's keep talking. So you keep walking us through your professional journey. Clearly, we now know what the inspiration was for the work you do, which we'll touch on more here momentarily. But tell us more. Lead us into your current role with the Atlanta Regional Commission.
Yeah. So was in grad school, like I said, for urban planning at Georgia Tech, was transportation specialization, so I could kind of take those opinions I had and get some data behind them, understand the processes. When I graduated, I went into consulting in transportation planning. I spent about a decade doing that. When I was,
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I was first out of grad school, I went to a consulting company that was down in national company, but their office down in Tampa, Florida. Was there about a year and a half doing primarily traffic studies. So, again, you look at traffic congestion intersection, you can go out, do counts, you put it into specialized software and get what's called a level of service, which is like a letter grade, A, B, C, D, E, or F. E and F for failing.
In terms of efficiency, traffic, how it handles volume and stuff?
How it handles volume, the amount of traffic congestion. And
safety.
All
of those things.
Well, safety is a different type of analysis. But
really?
Yeah, it's definitely part of what we did as well. I've had specific safety studies where you'd find like a couple hundred crashes at an individual intersection over a 3 or 4 year time span.
So if I can interject just for a second here, because after all of those sandwiches we've had through lunches through the years, I don't think I ever knew that you did 10 years as a consultant, because you look like you're 23, which is a compliment.
That's
a compliment.
Yeah, he's holding up good.
But so that was for a Florida-based firm. Were you
So they were national, but yeah, this was I was in their Tampa office. But,
okay.
It was a company called PBS&J, but they've since been bought out by a larger company called Atkins, which is British-based.
Yeah.
So yeah, these you'll have
That's
anything.
That's why
from,
we're getting roundabouts around here.
Kidding. Honestly,
I'm totally kidding.
There's a lot coming from because roundabouts weren't common in the U.S.
No,
there's a lot of that.
But they should be. They are great.
Yeah.
They are a great.
Hey, if Walton County, Georgia, is adopting roundabouts, they are going to be prevalent everywhere.
Right.
But Daniel, so when you were doing that consulting work, were you looking at cities coast to coast, or did you spend your time on several major cities? What did your workload look like?
When I was in Tampa, most of what I did was in South Florida somewhere, in or around Tampa, Florida area. Was there for about a year and a half, came back to the Atlanta area, went to a different company up in Peachtree Corners, Georgia, called Pond & Company. Most of what I did was kind of Metro Atlanta, North Georgia. Obviously, we're a region of over 5 million, almost 6 million people, so plenty of work in transportation and traffic and, bike and pedestrian analysis and transit and things like that.
Yep.
So, around Atlanta, you hear the Beltline and stuff like that comes up, and so worked on some of that. Worked on some things outside of Metro Atlanta, too. There's a handful of projects kind of usually still in the southeast, but yeah, definitely have worked on anything from small towns to big cities and everything in between.
And that's in your current role. Is that right?
No, that was still when I was in consulting. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Doing everything.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, was mostly Metro Atlanta, but certainly, other parts of Georgia and throughout the southeast that we would work. And most of it was public sector clients, so state DOTs, local governments, things like that. Occasionally private sector, occasionally military. Worked on a military for a military base contract in Gulfport, Mississippi one time.
Okay.
So for a traffic study. So
I have to get your opinion on something.
Okay.
Why is it in the Atlanta area that we have so many intersections, blind intersections, at the top of hills or at the top of hills with also a curve in them? Why is that? Is it the legendary reason that I hear? These are old, and the reason that I've heard is that they are ancient cow paths and Indian trails. I don't, and they were traffic areas, and we just haven't re-engineered them. Is that
for the most part? I would say a lot of that's true. Not every roadway, but a lot of roads in our region certainly were, kind of paths that were already there before automobiles or anything. It was Native Americans living in the area, and they just continued past. And and a lot of those were, at high points.
Yeah.
So Peachtree Street, if you look at downtown Midtown in Atlanta, strangely, I don't know where I picked up this piece of trivia, but it's the Eastern Continental Divide.
Okay.
Meaning if rain falls on the east side of Peachtree Street, it eventually will end up in the Atlantic Ocean. If it falls on the west side of Peachtree Street, it will eventually end up in the Gulf of Mexico.
You have got to be kidding me.
That's what they told me in a class sometime. I don't remember where, but
that is
that's kind of like downtown, Midtown, maybe Buckhead.
But don't stand on the middle of Peachtree to see which way the water breaks.
You got to follow it for a long ways. It's going to hit some rivers.
That was my first thought.
Some streams, creeks, rivers, but yeah, eventually. But yeah, I think it naturally kind of built out from there.
Yeah.
Metro Atlanta, it's naturally very hilly. Obviously, we're in the foothills of the Appalachians.
Yes. A lot of physical barriers. Plus, this is one of the original 13 colonies. So, unlike land grant states, like I come from, Kansas, it wasn't divided up into sections. It was kind of catch as catch can.
Exactly.
Right?
And so there was that, and outside of say downtown Midtown Atlanta and some of the suburban downtowns, you can see like where you have a little bit of a grid and was planned, but beyond that, it wasn't really planned out. It was kind of free flow. Whatever happens. If you compare it to say a New York or some other major cities where you see this solid grid that goes out, and it's very easy to say, oh, I need to get to 20th Street, and if you're at 10th Street, well, 10 blocks up. Atlanta, just small pieces of it are like that, and so it kind of developed very differently, and in part because most of our development was post-automobile, and so we got a very suburban style of development versus a more urban style that you might get in a New York, a Paris, a London, somewhere that developed before the automobile.
Interesting. Yeah. All right, so I want to shift gears here.
We probably ought to get to his job now, don't you think?
Well, there's so much interesting stuff he's sharing.
It all builds up, right?
Yeah, it does.
I mean, it all does kind of come to where you are now, right? Doesn't it?
It does.
Atlanta Regional Commission.
But before we talk about ARC, I want to make sure. I was a slow adopter. I was a laggard when it came to appreciating the Beltline. We've talked about that before, and I think for folks outside of Atlanta. when they hear Beltline, they may be like me and not get it.
Right.
But that is reshaping the metro area in many ways. There's probably a number of factors that is, but that certainly is one of those projects with deep roots, lots of appreciation, and lots of usage. So explain in a nutshell, especially since you were part of the project, what is the Beltline?
So the Beltline is kind of a loop that goes around downtown Midtown Atlanta, roughly. It is built upon abandoned rail lines. So Atlanta, going kind of back to the very beginning of Atlanta, it was built along rail lines. It was where rail lines from the East Coast could meet rail lines going to the Midwest and avoid the Appalachian Mountains. So this was the furthest point to the north that they could do that. So it started with rail lines, and we have rail lines going in every direction except for due north because of the Appalachian Mountains. And so there were lots of rail lines in town, still are.
Atlanta originally known as Terminus.
Exactly. Right. And so rail lines are going everywhere, and about 20 years ago almost, a grad student at Georgia Tech, not that somebody I knew at the time, before my time, Ryan Gravel, he wrote his thesis and said, what if we took this route and turned it into something where it was more of a took the abandoned rail lines and turned them into a transit and a trail loop. And so the idea came about maybe that'll work. And so it kind of started picking up momentum over time. It was, how do we acquire the property? How do we pay for this? How do we, fund it, design, construction, everything. Right. And so we're partway through that process. And by partway, I mean that pieces of the trail have been built on the east side, on the north side, on the southwest side, with the plan to complete that entire 22-mile loop with trail sections, and beyond that, hopefully eventually transit as well.
Yep.
And to connect into some others, because in Cobb County, we have the Silver Comet Trail, which was an old train grade that went from Smyrna to Birmingham.
Absolutely. And the Silver Comet already, it reaches the Alabama state line, where it picks up a different trail in Alabama. I think Chief Laduga or something. I may be butchering that name, and I apologize if I am. But it basically, state of Alabama has something similar that gets you to Birmingham.
Right.
And so the Silver Comet goes all the way to Cobb County. It doesn't quite get into the Beltline in Atlanta, but there's plans to connect those two and make that connection. Similarly, there's something called the Path Foundation around Metro Atlanta that builds trails, and there's an existing trail that goes from the Beltline all the way out to Stone Mountain, east of Atlanta, which folks around here are familiar with. If you're not, it's a very large granite mountain. It's a state park around
Big
it.
rock.
So, exactly. And so it connects to that. There's the Path 400 trail going north. And so it's something kind of building this network of trails piece by piece,
But the interesting thing about Stone Mountain, and I'm an expert because I toured there not too long ago with one of my children.
That's what makes you an expert.
That's
really.
Right. That's overnight expert.
They do share a lot of information.
So yes, unlike most mountains that are formed by the plates colliding and pushing upwards, Stone Mountain actually, the top of Stone Mountain used to be ground level, and a millennium of years eroded the non-granite around the mountain, which made it a mountain.
Yeah.
You knew this already?
I did, and did you also know that Stone Mountain is far larger underneath the surface than it is above?
I knew that.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have let you. You were going to finish with that, weren't you? I'm sorry.
You stole my thunder. You stole my granite.
My a previous company, we always held our customer gathering at Stone Mountain, and people were fascinated by it. So we learned a lot about it. It is an amazing piece of rock.
So, all right. So let's talk about the Atlanta Regional Commission. If you do business in Atlanta, you probably rubbed elbows with folks. It's a pretty capable and large organization. But some folks may make certain assumptions around what it does and what y'all do. So if you could, Daniel, talk about what the ARC does, and then talk about what you do in your role.
Okay. So the Atlanta Regional Commission, or ARC, large regional organization that does a number of different things. I'm on the transportation side, under what's called a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. And I'll circle back to that, kind of get into some more details in a minute, but I want to hit on the fact that we do a lot of non-transportation things too. I'm a transportation planner, but there's a lot of different areas you can work in planning. And so we have folks in community development that are focused on land use planning and economic development. We're the North Georgia Water Resources District offices, so we talk about water or lack thereof sometimes, or right now more flooding in Atlanta, it seems, with the amount of rain we've had. But certainly drought and not enough water in the region has been an issue at times, and so they're the folks who have to kind of manage that at a regional level. So we have that staff. We have staff that's focused on data and research. They're the ones that kind of make the projections, saying how many millions of people are projected to move here in the coming decades. We have staff that are focused on transportation demand management, so kind of encouraging carpool, vanpool, telework, various incentive programs to get people enrolled in that.
Very timely.
So time out for 1 second, because here in the South, we all love to drive.
We do.
Unlike other areas of the globe and other cities here in the States. But we all love that independence, and we're all are like stubborn about it sometimes. So that's what you just described there in terms of how we're trying to change behaviors. It's a tough thing to do in Atlanta, isn't it?
It's a tough thing to do in most areas, to be honest, especially regions like Atlanta that were built post-World War II, post-automobile, which is really most of the United States. We look at a New York or some other areas that are more grid and historic, but obviously we have a lot of sprawling areas throughout the country. So it is a challenge. It's something where you'll see kind of a generational shift of folks who are younger than myself more likely to use alternative means, where older than myself might be more likely to drive.
Yep.
But at the same time, that's not everybody. That's kind of stereotypes, and each person kind of takes a unique approach.
As my wife likes to tell me, that there's some millennial in all of us, and there's probably some Gen Z in all of us, or there's some silent generation in all of us, right? You can't generalize.
Generation X raised Generation Y and Generation Z, so there's us and them and them and us. It's inevitable, right?
That's it exactly. But what we've seen is certainly, the programs to kind of encourage carpool, vanpool have some impact. Yeah. What we've seen really in the past 5-6 years a lot is teleworking has taken off, because there was actually kind of a large regional survey that's finishing up now looking at the impacts of alternative modes like that and usage. And what we've seen is, there was always a little bit of carpool, vanpool, telework out there, transit usage out there, a few folks even walking or biking, especially, taking the Beltline.
Yeah.
But what we really saw was this big jump in teleworking over the past 5 years. I think we're getting to the point where the technology is getting there better than it used to be, and it didn't just get there yesterday. It's something that, it's kind of been there, and so it's been able to kind of filter into workplaces and become a norm. You may not do it every day, but if you're even doing it once a week, you just reduced your travel by 20%. If we reduced 20% by everybody in the region, we'd have a whole lot less traffic congestion in Metro Atlanta. So if you can do even just 1 day a week telework, that's great.
I think if you could cover the Beltline, I think people would ride bikes more. I'm half joking there, but I mean the truth is it rains 55 inches a year here. Right. When we have a drought. A drought is technically 20% reduction, right? Or is it 30%? It's somewhere in that range. But when we had a drought one year, we got 32 inches of rain.
Right.
So it rains so much here. And the beautiful thing about these rail grades as a trail is that they are relatively flat because trains can't climb hills. Right.
Yeah, Metro Atlanta is so hilly, but the Beltline's flat.
Yeah.
Because of the
likewise with the Silver Comet Trail. Yeah. It's an easy ride if you're an old guy trying to get in shape.
It is good. Yeah. I enjoy it. Yeah.
You're not an old guy. I'm saying me.
I'm solidly middle aged. That's where I'm holding on to for a while.
Yeah.
All right. So
I'm middle aged. I'm going to be like 130.
So you were talking about some of the things you do, some initiatives y'all do.
Yeah.
Obviously, ARC is much broader than that, but
I'll just add that we also have a workforce group. I know, Scott, you've met some folks with there.
Yep.
Kind of focus on workforce needs of Metro Atlanta, training programs, things like that. We're also the area agency on aging, which is actually a big part of what happens at ARC, because that's a huge need, and it's a lot more staff in that than some of those other groups I just mentioned combined. And so that's a lot of what we do as well. But then myself, like I said, I'm in the transportation world, transportation planner.
Yep.
ARC, we're what's designated as a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or an MPO. That is a federal designation, so we handle required long-range regional transportation planning for Metro Atlanta, and so that's a federal requirement.
Wow.
Any region with urbanized area with 50,000 people or more has an MPO. So most anywhere you're at in the United States, unless you're in a truly rural area, you probably have the equivalent of an ARC in some form as an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Wow.
So let's touch on the Freight Task Force. That's, I think, where we initially met years ago, and that's a group that you lead. And I think the first – so I'm by no means am I a transportation expert, but I've picked up some really interesting observations and insights and contacts from this task force you lead.
Right.
One of the first studies that really I gleaned out of some of the things that y'all help facilitate and help communicate was the study that some groups were doing that evaluated truck rest stops. Mm-hmm. And it's something, I promise you, it's something as much as probably most Americans don't maybe know about the truck driver shortage. Folks that aren't in supply chain, aren't in transportation, just like I've got plenty of blind spots. Folks don't know about that, but by extension, no one ever thinks about how can these truck drivers that have this massive responsibility, they're ongoing problem solvers, they're becoming more and more technologists these days, where they can pull over easily and rest in a safe and secure place.
Because they have mandated rest requirements now, right?
Exactly,
yeah.
So speak to, not to rehash the whole project, but speak to that a little bit, especially y'all's role in helping to drive data and awareness and problems like that, and then maybe give us something that is, top of mind project these days.
So I'll start with the why we did that project. You kind of set it up pretty well, but for us, we were seeing this was a need at the national level. Federal Highway Administration was starting to push this out. It's in something called Jason's Law, is in some federal transportation legislation called MAP 21. It was a MAP 21 update passed, I think, in 2011 or 12 that included this.
Is that
MAP, every transportation law has some acronym.
Yeah.
I think MAP was like moving ahead for progress or something.
Got it.
They kind of start with an acronym and work backwards, it seems.
And was Jason's Law, was that named after, y'all referenced during this meeting a couple years back, a truck driver that pulled over, I think in South Carolina.
Right.
It was not he had to find somewhere. And a lot of drivers will spend a good bit of time, as your study pointed out, trying to find a secure place. This gentleman, unfortunately, lost his life because he was being robbed or something like that.
You got it exactly. He was looking for somewhere to park, couldn't find anywhere, parked in a vacant lot where a lot of truckers had parked in the past because they knew it was available. Unfortunately, that night he was robbed and murdered. I think he had something like $7 on him is what they found. And while they did catch the person who did that, at the same time, that's little solace to his widow. He had a toddler. His wife was pregnant. It was really a tragedy in the fact that so many people depended on him. He had so many loved ones, and so it's something that was kind of a call to action to a certain extent for the federal government of saying you have hours of service requirements on truck drivers, and by that I mean there's a maximum number of hours they can drive per day. And then some other rest breaks during the day, things like that requirements. But then after they drive a maximum of 11 hours in a 14-hour time period, they have to stop for a minimum of 10 hours. But there's not enough rest areas or truck stops, places like that for truck drivers to park, especially in urban areas. If you're in a truly rural area, the chances are you may find a rest area truck stop without too much of an issue.
On-ramp. You see a lot of trucks on on-ramps.
You do, and
off-ramps.
That's an issue. That's kind of considered an unauthorized location. It's usually illegal to park there. From the truck driver perspective, it's, hey, I have nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
It's better than a vacant lot, because there's always some cars passing by. On the flip side, they may be rear-ended while they're sitting there, and while the truck driver themselves may be okay in that, if you're the car who rear-ends that, anybody in that's a safety issue for them. So there have been a few crashes over the years where somebody hit a truck that was parked like that. So that's not ideal either. And police officers sometimes are hesitant to actually knock on the window and say you have to move because they're probably asleep.
They know they have nowhere to go also.
And they need to sleep to be safe when they hit the road.
But let's make sure everyone understands why that's a problem and what some of the root causes are there. Hours of service requirements, 11 hours.
Right.
So when you're approaching the end of that, you've got to pull over, right?
Exactly.
Or you get in trouble.
Right.
Technical word there. But the challenge, based on a lot of the data that study uncovered, is that there weren't enough locations, especially safe, well-lit, secure locations, number one. And number two, the thing that still sticks out in my mind is that the data y'all uncovered was that on average, I believe truck drivers were spending over an hour a day just trying to find somewhere to pull over. And you think about how that slows down supply chain. What if they could, and all things kind of happen on the roads, traffic, going through cities. Of course, we're going to get curveballs. But if you could just plan and know ahead of a time where the location is based on where you'll be, maybe we could if we could cut that figure in half, and save that stress and certainly protect our drivers, that would be a huge win-win, right?
It would. I'll say first and foremost, the truck drivers do plan ahead. They certainly
Right,
they
that's
know
right.
where the truck stops are, where
Good
the
point.
rest areas are. They're doing their best to plan their day, and that plan is only as good as what gets thrown at them that day, which
Right.
they usually have little to no control. They're the ones in charge of the truck, and that's about it.
So let me rephrase.
So,
if we could plan ahead and have more locations,
Right.
to be aware
more
of, that's what I
visibility to
meant,
those
or more
locations.
visibility. Yeah, that's what I
Right.
meant. Yeah, good point.
So they have their route planned out, have an idea of what they're doing, but then inevitably there's some traffic congestion. They know certain times of day where there's going to be some, as we all
Right.
do. But then, they do this for a living. They're experts on it. But then you hit that unexpected traffic congestion at 11 a.m., 2 p.m.,
Right.
9 p.m., something
3
like that.
lanes
That you're
closed on I-75.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
That you didn't expect there to be a crash or there's construction, so suddenly that throws off their day. They also run into issues where they may go make a pickup or drop off at a warehouse, and they allocate, okay, I think I'm going to be here an hour to make that pickup or drop off. Next thing you know, they're there 3 or 4 hours or 5 hours or something like that. And the way the hours of service works, while they're not technically driving, they're still on duty, essentially. And so there's an 11-hour max of drive time, but 14 hours total. So, you've only got 3 hours of that buffer time that you use for, a lunch break or for, spending time and making a pickup or drop off. So
Right.
suddenly you could go to this pickup or drop off and think, okay, I'll be here an hour, and then I've got a couple hours left, and I'm going to hit the road and hit this rest area or this truck stop, an hour or so up the road, and next thing you know, you ran out of time while you're either sitting in traffic or you're sitting making this pickup or drop off, and you don't have time left on your hours of service to get to that location that you had scouted out ahead of time and said that's where I'm going to park. And so at that point, they're left with either driving and being in violation of their hours of service, or parking in an unauthorized location. So a highway ramp, a vacant lot, side of the road, somewhere like that.
Yep.
So it's bad option or other bad option.
Right.
And so much of the time you see them
Which of
picking-
these bad ideas do you want to try?
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
They're picking the least bad option, and
Yeah.
so sometimes you'll get complaints locally when they're parked in a parking lot or something like that, and it's like, well, they're making a rational choice, and that if they violate the federal law, it can have a bigger impact than violating things locally, where chances are, at worst, somebody's going to knock on the door and say you have to move.
Yeah.
Most of the time, that's worse. But certainly, they can be a crime victim, as we've discussed, and so that is it's not frequent, but it can be terrible when it happens.
Yeah.
So there's kind of weighing the negatives and the risks. So
I think it's a blind spot, no pun intended, for part of the truck drivers' world beyond the shortage. That it's great to see leadership gather together and get data around it, and then figure out how, at a minimum, as a Metro Atlanta community, business community, and infrastructure, how we can address it here. And arguably, who doesn't use Metro Atlanta highways and byways and infrastructure to, you name it. Everybody comes through here, right? All right. So beyond that project, what's one of the current things you're working on?
So right now we're working on something we call freight cluster plans. And I'll kind of give a broader, brief overview. We completed a regional freight plan update in 2016. And again, this all feeds into our federal planning requirements.
Okay.
So we work with Georgia DOT. We work with all the cities and counties in a 20-county metro Atlanta area. So almost 100 cities and 20 counties and state DOT. And so anything that uses federal transportation funding, that's all in our plan. It's required to be there. So that's kind of why we exist, because the reality is there could be a project in Fulton County that has an impact on Douglas County or Cobb County, something like that. And so we have to look at things regionally and make sure, things make sense, or that, you don't widen a road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes and then at the county line it drops back down to 2 lanes.
Right.
You have to look at things at a regional level. So our regional freight plan update, we completed in 2016, has a project list, but of course it said, hey, you need to do some additional plans. That's job security for people like me, so
Right.
we make sure that's in there.
Right.
And so part of it was do the truck parking study, because we saw it was a growing issue. Part of it was doing what we called freight cluster plans, and because we looked at our region, we have a lot of county level plans, we have some city level plans, we have some plans at activity center, neighborhood level,
Walmart
downtown
parking lot or whatever, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's all the way down to individual retailers
It
sometimes.
is, absolutely, yeah. Development
mall.
of regional impact, DRIs, would fall under that. However, we hadn't really done plans in industrial areas. They had somewhat been ignored because they're not interesting.
No one in
they're
their
not
right
sexy.
mind
They're not like, let's look at
would
that.
park in an industrial area overnight.
No, I don't mean just for truck parking. I just
yeah.
mean for anything, for transportation and
yeah,
more
of course,
broadly.
of course.
That we have all these plans, but not in that area. For
Yeah.
transportation or land use or economic development, In some ways, it's just like, well, that's zoned industrial. Yeah, we want the business. We want to bring in the businesses and the jobs, but kind of the proactive, let's plan for it, hadn't necessarily happened in the industrial areas.
Interesting.
And so we identified that need. And we put some federal planning funds aside and said, we need local partners for those, because you always have to have a kind of a 20% local match for these federal funds.
Okay.
Somebody's got to have skin in the game if they want to do this. It's not just a freebie.
Right.
Got to make sure that they're invested, that they're going to do this, and then do something with it after the fact. Because once they spend some money on it, they hopefully don't want it to just sit on a shelf. They want to be proactive and move forward. So we made some of that available. So right now we're doing 4 of those. And have a couple more in the works after that. But the 4 we're working on right now, one of them is around the Atlanta airport, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. So obviously air cargo is important there, but lots of stuff just passes through that area. Yeah, growing. Amazon has a massive distribution facility there, and some other rather massive distribution centers, and then got freight forwarders, things like that. So.
And we should say Elliot Page, who was also at the 2020 Atlanta Supply Chain Awards, and Linda Ashwani Nate. They are 2 of the leaders that lead the air cargo at ATL, and they just launched, which is probably going to impact some of y'all's work,
right? The
Atlanta Air Cargo Community System,
right?
Which is making it much easier to get business and tap into the air cargo that comes through the world's busiest airport. So y'all probably have a full plate ahead as you plan around the airport, as folks look to use that industrial space around the airport, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of infrastructure needs, and so that's kind of what we're doing. Part of it's a traffic study I mentioned earlier, and so that's when you go do the counts and get that level of service, figure out what those needs are.
Aerotropolis is what it is. Referring to the place around the airport, right?
That's exactly. It's the Aerotropolis CIDs, Community Improvement Districts, that are actually our local partner on that. And CIDs are very common in Metro Atlanta. They're kind of called business improvement districts in other parts of the country. But these are areas that are self-taxing, where businesses come together and say, we need more money spent on transportation infrastructure or public safety or beautification, whatever it might be. And so they become a self-taxing area where they actually pay more in taxes, and it goes to that CID, who then in turn can use it to leverage grants like the one we have available and kind of bring in more transportation funds and build more transportation infrastructure to serve those needs with those areas. So
makes sense to me.
Yeah. So that's Aerotropolis is happening like that. Got 2 more going on northeast of Atlanta, one in Gwinnett County, the Gateway 85 CID, which is kind of Jimmy Carter Boulevard, Buford Highway, I-85 area. One in northeast DeKalb County, which is the Tucker Summit CID, which is Mountain Industrial Boulevard, Stone Mountain Freeway area that you may be familiar with out there.
Oh, yeah.
And then another one's kind of on the edge of our region in Spalding County, which is kind of halfway between here and Macon. Most folks may not be familiar with Spalding County if you're not local, but it's kind of out there, a little bit rural still, but has Caterpillar for manufacturing, some other major manufacturers out there, and a lot of undeveloped land, and some existing major roads there. And they're like, we've got the land. We want to bring in more development, but be smart about it. We want to plan ahead for it.
Is Rennes in Spalding County? Rennes, Georgia.
Town.
Do you know what city? As folks try to put
city would be mostly Griffin, yeah.
Okay, Griffin. Okay. Caterpillar is a big player down there.
Exactly, yeah.
Gotcha.
Boy, and that's a tough stretch of road between Macon and Atlanta, especially as you get closer to Atlanta, of course. But that is a tough stretch of road. The thought of additional development and more trucks there is a little bit scary, isn't it?
It
is.
We're sitting with the guy that can.
Right. I'm thinking of it from a user standpoint, and I'm thinking that's a big responsibility because that is already a treacherous and congested
and
segment
a lot of that congestion is there in Henry County, McDonough, Locust Grove, which has a massive amounts of industrial. I think Home Depot has 2 facilities right there. Yeah. One in McDonough, one in Locust Grove, little towns which are basically next door to each other.
Right.
But it grew so much that it was made sense to have 2 facilities from a big company like that, and obviously lots and lots of other distribution
Seaport,
centers
you got Savannah on one side, Atlanta, and then the everyone's getting to the rail. I mean, you got all kinds of factors that make that stretch tough. But so clearly, these freight clusters are going to help the state of Georgia continue to help expedite everyone's global freight that comes through here.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And that south side is so key for us. You mentioned the port, and I mentioned Henry County, McDonough, Locust Grove. Part of why they grew, they were in that geographic sweet spot because a driver could leave Henry County, drive to the port of Savannah, pick up a container from the port, get back to Henry County, and meet their hours of service for a day. Because the port in Savannah, they'll get you in and out pretty quick.
Never thought about that.
And so if you come from the north side of Atlanta, you're going to have some traffic congestion.
Yeah.
But if you start in Henry County, your congestion mostly will be Henry County. And so you can do that. Spalding County kind of similar, but it's kind of a little bit further south, so it's just starting to hit more of that development. And so that location can matter a lot in terms of the type of business that you may be getting.
It's fascinating to hear how regulation, which it sounds very intuitive, but regulation kind of drives where things get developed, including those hours of service for drivers.
It's interesting how they conflict with one another as well.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
And, we talk – you hear this term a lot, unintended consequences.
Yes.
Right? And it's interesting how complex those things are. I'm sure they seem simple in the political spectrum, but they are very, very complex
always
when it
challenging.
comes to transportation.
You pull this lever, it has this consequence over here. You pull this one, it goes back the other way. So
the truck parking in particular, because you have the federal requirements for the hours of service,
right.
But part of why you don't have more truck stops is because of local zoning, because the zoning doesn't allow the truck stop to get built, because most people don't really want to live near a truck stop. It's
right.
not a high value, like, hey, I want that next door to me, but at the same time, it's hugely necessary for these truck drivers to have somewhere safe to sleep, to grab a bite to eat, to buy groceries, things like that.
I love truck stops because it lets me know that CBs still exist, which I did not know. You can always find a hat. They have the best shakes. And really, honestly, the lounges and the bathrooms in truck stops, they are impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like a mini dormitory.
They have so many more services and things available than a typical, like when you're traveling longer distances, that's a good place to stop because it'll be busy, it'll be safer. There's more food options, more stuff if you need to buy something on the road.
Yeah. I'm really only half joking. I mean, when you come up on some of those,
but never,
it's like a small city.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
But never leave your gas tank being fueled unattended. We'll save that story for another show.
You saw somebody who did that.
I saw somebody that did that.
I've experienced that.
Experienced some overflow spillage.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, but nevertheless, we'll keep driving. No pun intended. So as we start to wrap up this interview, Daniel, you're like a walking encyclopedia of so many things from a development, a regulation, a transportation, which of course is the backbone of supply chain. We're going to have to bring you back. This is going to be like a multi-part episode.
Absolutely.
But let's start, as we kind of start winding down, I want to get your key takeaway or two about Modex, which I know you didn't spend every day here, but, of course, we saw you on Tuesday. You probably poked around some things here today. Key takeaways.
So Tuesday, Supply Chain Awards are great, kind of hearing different stories of the folks who are the award winners. And then afterwards, got to walk around the show here at Modex, which is massive. If you haven't been to this, massive doesn't do it justice. And it has all of Exhibit Hall B and C here, and just one of those exhibit halls is huge in its own right. And so
400,000 square feet under roof is that's what John Paxton just told us.
I believe it, and it feels bigger somehow.
It does. It does when you're walking it for sure.
It did when I was trying to get to your booth today. I don't think I took the shortest route to get here. I thought I was going to, and I didn't. But
we have to study that. Freight Task Force kind of study that.
I just want those. Okay, that's the next generation. We all have Google Maps and Waze that'll tell you how to get somewhere. I want to know how to get from that parking deck to this booth.
4970.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but walking around here on Tuesday, I see automation everywhere. I see technology everywhere. There's these massive displays and all these things that are moving on their own. And it's not just a conveyor belt. It's, here's the thing that can pick up your pallet by itself, and here's the thing that can pick up something much heavier than your heaviest pallet by itself, and it knows where to go. And so this technology is everywhere. And I was talking to a guy at a booth, and he was like, yeah, we've got all this set up, and so do all our competitors. Everybody has this hardware at this point. Everybody's got very similar hardware. He's like, the key is the software. He's like, it's tough to demonstrate that on the show floor, but that's where we're making the advances. So the hardware, the things that are moving the things around autonomously, that's been around a few years at this point, and is almost ubiquitous.
Over a decade, as a matter of fact.
Exactly. And so we're not at the beginning stages. We're more that intermediate stages, and how do we optimize the software and move things forward like that? And so I think on the supply chain side, that's really where things are moving forward. It's kind of like how we had cell phones, and then at some point you got a BlackBerry, and then you got an iPhone or an Android, and then that first iPhone or Android was nice. It could get on the internet and do things, but it wasn't until people started getting apps and really changing things that you saw the differences. Like, oh, we can have an Uber and a Lyft that can have a real world impact.
Change the world.
So we're kind of getting there, I think, on supply chain technology. And I think on transportation technology, I see the parallels in my work as well, because we're seeing so much more transportation technology that's a little bit getting to where it's been at that pilot phase for the past decade, where you'll hear about stories of autonomous pilot testing here and there. Here in the city of Atlanta on North Avenue, there's a connected vehicle corridor. If you want to, you can download something called the Travel Safely app. It's on the iPhone, on the App Store and the Android Store, and it's free, and you can drive down there, and it's going to tell you messages as you go down North Avenue. You're sitting at a red light. It's about to turn green. It'll say, "Get ready for green," in this robotic voice. If you're approaching a red light and you start to speed up, it will sound an alarm. It is going to tell you that, because the makers of this app took me on a test drive out there, and the guy said, "Don't worry, I'm gonna speed up towards this red light. Don't freak out, because I'm gonna have to speed up and then hit the brakes." And so he has to trick the software to think he's about to run the red light, because some percentage of red light running is just because of a distracted driver that's looking at their phone or eating or talking or whatever.
And this device can tell that you're not going to make it. You are going to run this light, even if you speed up.
That's the thing. It knew that we were speeding up.
Okay.
It was like if we're slowing down, okay, but it knew you're speeding up. That light is red. You don't need to do that.
Red.
Yeah, the light was red.
Already was red.
The light was red. Exactly.
We need a whiteboard. We need to back this out for us, Daniel.
But the idea is like that you may not be paying attention and see that it's red. That some percentage of red light runners just aren't paying attention. And so it's a safety issue of, you want to avoid that crash that happens when somebody runs a red light, because those are usually bad ones.
Right.
And so it's something that gives you, it sounds an alarm. Like, it's not subtle when it does that.
That's why he warned you.
Exactly, because he was going to have to hit the brakes. There's other software that does other things. Somewhere you're coming around a curve on a highway, you're traveling 60 miles an hour, say it's gridlocked up ahead, you don't see it until you come around that curve. You might rear end that car ahead of you. This kind of gives you that warning in advance. There's lots of different pieces of technology that are giving you those warnings. We hear about autonomous vehicles and Teslas and things like that. All that's moving forward and getting there. The connected vehicle stuff's kind of been in the background and growing at a same rate, but it doesn't catch your attention as much.
Right.
But it's all coming, and it's coming. 10 years from now, it'll be standard.
That's right. All right. So as much as we hate to wind this down, we want to make sure folks can connect with you and learn more about the Atlanta Regional Commission. So give us some guidance there. Okay.
So want to learn more about us, go to atlantaregional.org. You can find anything about pretty much any of the stuff I talked about in terms of ARC. There's a drop-down menu for freight. You can find all of our freight web pages, including one for our Freight Advisory Task Force, which Scott mentioned. That's something where we really need to hear from the private sector about what your needs are in terms of transportation, trucks on the road, railroad needs, airport, air cargo needs. Because when we talk, again, this is where your federal transportation dollars are going. You see road construction out there. You're seeing the construction workers. Somebody designed that project, and before that, somebody had to plan it, figure out how to spend the money, where it could come from. And so we want to get that input. And so that's true for us. That's true for every organization like us nationally, every MPO. And even if you don't have an MPO, you have somebody doing this job that needs to hear from you, because at the end of the day, the decision makers are elected officials, and they're going to listen to voters primarily. Freight doesn't vote. Freight's not in the voting booth. And so we need to hear from you. Not yet. So we want to hear from you.
That's good.
So it might be a survey sometimes, things like that, but it's something where these meetings, in particular, Scott's been there, we'll have these various plans and studies going on that we need to hear what's happening in your world. We have information about those on our website. I know this, recording in Modex is going to come out in, maybe in the next couple of weeks. The next one after that would probably be May 21st, tentatively scheduled at this point, but we'll have the details on our website, and we usually post on Eventbrite as well, where you can find the details and register.
And they can get connected with you on LinkedIn as well.
On LinkedIn, absolutely.
May 21st for the next Freight Task Force.
Exactly. First thing in the morning. We usually do them 8:30 to 10 a.m., so you can come to that and then go to your day job.
It's a great event. It's a great event. It's a great not only market intel and industry intel event, great networking. Daniel and the team does a great job. Everyone's welcome.
Absolutely,
right?
If you're in the freight and logistics industry, come on. We ask you, sign up on Eventbrite just so we have a head count and can plan ahead. But
and you can get on his. You've got a communications list.
Absolutely.
And so folks go through AtlantaRegional.org.
Absolutely,
You can probably find that, and you can certainly find Daniel Studdard on LinkedIn.
Right. And there's a page to submit comments or questions to ARC or to Freight, and you can get to me through there as well.
And we'll try to so Daniel, we'll send you a tool to share some information. If you want to send us one of those direct links, we'll include it in the show notes.
Okay.
So folks, we'll make it even easier.
That'd be great.
So we've been talking with Daniel Studdard, Principal Transportation Planner with the Atlanta Regional Commission. It doesn't, spending 40 minutes with Daniel does not do it justice in terms of
it's impossible because I've got a half dozen questions still.
Well, we'll have to have Daniel back on. We're really great friend of the show,
yeah.
Great ally for business throughout the U.S., but certainly throughout the Metro Atlanta area. Appreciate your partnership throughout the 2020 Atlanta Supply Chain Awards, 2 years in a row now.
Appreciate it.
And stay tuned for information and details for year 3 of the Atlanta Supply Chain Awards. So to our audience, stay tuned as we continue our coverage of MODEX 2020 right here in Atlanta, GA. In the meantime, you can check out other upcoming events, replays of our interviews, other resources at supplychainnowradio.com. Big thanks to our guest, Daniel Studdard, again with the Atlanta Regional Commission. Find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. On behalf of the entire team here, Greg, Amanda, Clay, Chris, you name it, many, many more. Scott Luton here wishing you a wonderful week ahead, and we will see you next time on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.